Roll for Crit is made possible thanks to the support of viewers like you and our patrons on our Patreon page.
You can become a patron for just $1 a month at patreon.com/rollforcrit.
Welcome to this Roll for Crit review. Today, we have a little treat for you. We're taking a look at My City, a game that was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres in 2020. Now let's see if it was worthy of the nomination, or was it just a bit of hype?
This game is a legacy game, which means that new rules are going to be introduced over time as you play, but the basic premise and basic rules will always be the same. Players are building their cities using their own special tiles. Everybody has the same set of tiles, which are of 3 different colors, red, blue, and yellow, and in various shapes. And each round, a card is going to be flipped from the construction deck, and that card will show one of those tiles. You will take it from your own personal supply and place it somewhere on your board. At the start, it's going to be somewhere next to the river in the middle of the board, and then after that, new pieces can go anywhere adjacent to an existing tile. You cannot overlap those buildings, you cannot cover up the mountains or forest spaces on the sides. You can cover up rocks and trees on the board. However, you may not want to cover up trees because they will be worth points at the end of the game, and rocks will be negative points. So you do want to cover up rocks. So you're trying to decide where you want to place these. Eventually, pretty quickly early on actually, the colors of the buildings will begin to matter. But essentially you are trying to fill in spaces, cover up as much as you can of the board with your tiles, because you'll also lose points if there are any empty spaces, not counting the mountains or the forest, which you cannot build upon, just the empty light green spaces. And you wait until that entire deck runs out and see where everyone's tiles have been placed, make your final scores, and whoever has the most points is the winner.
Now, the Legacy game is broken up into 8 chapters, each one with 3 episodes. It's suggested you play through all 3 for each chapter in one play session. If you look at the board, there are 2 sides. This side that have the empty sidebar and bottom bar, that's the Legacy side. That's where you're going to be putting a lot of stickers. You can probably guess that those empty sidebars are for stickers. The other side is for regular play. Whether you finish the entire campaign or not, once you hit around chapter 5, you can play a regular game that won't matter how you win or lose or what stickers you place during the Legacy story. The Legacy story, like we said, will go over those 8 chapters, and as you progress, you'll add stickers and change some rules around of like what works, what doesn't. Maybe sometimes you're able to build on some places or won't want to build on some places. It changes as whatever the chapter's rules imply.
Yeah, so the game may sound very simple, and at its core, it is pretty simple, even as it progresses, but pretty quickly, by the time you're a few chapters in, there are going to be a lot more scoring conditions, a lot more rules, new types of buildings, new stickers with different effects that will go on your board. We won't spoil any of those surprises for down the line if you are someone who's planning on playing this one, but we'll vaguely allude to those things from our own experience, as we did get the chance to play through all 8 chapters of the game. So it's 24 individual games total. So that's a lot, and each one will last you probably around 30 minutes. And then, like you said, we can, at the end, there's the eternal mode, so you does have technically infinite replay value, but not with all the same rules that will be introduced later on. It can get really crazy in some of those sessions, and sometimes your strategies will have to really differ. Like the same thing that works in one game will not work 4 games later necessarily.
This is a Legacy game, so that means there's going to be plenty of stickers for you to place. Now, depending on how each game ends, there usually is a reward or maybe lack thereof a bad thing versus getting more good things depending on where you place. Now, the way they tell you, they have a nice sheet that explains for each episode what you get. However, depending on your player count, can be a little confusing who gets what. It took us a couple times to understand because we played with just the 2 of us.
It's really the 2-player rules that were a little confusing. Second player gets the other reward, basically the 3rd or 4th player reward if you're only playing with 2, instead of the second player reward. But then sometimes there are other bonuses that also have that, and it was not always totally clear if you're supposed to get still the second place or nothing. But beyond that, 2-player pretty much works exactly the same way as 3 or 4 player mode.
This is our third completed Legacy game, so very proud of us. Though,
Pat ourselves on the back for that one.
first competitive one. We technically started Seafall, but
that we've finished.
yes.
Yeah. Oh, we've done Risk Legacy as well.
Right, that one is
and Betrayal. Betrayal is technically competitive as well.
I guess it is, but it just feels weird because it's 1v all, so it feels different.
You're still trying to get the most wins in each game.
That's true. And after playing through the full one, and I feel it's still an issue in some of those, mostly maybe seeing a little bit in Betrayal. Definitely, I can see it in Risk, and even though this isn't Legacy, I see this component in actually Descent. Is this idea of how do you balance the rewards? Because sometimes it feels like certain rewards don't feel as good, or how do you make it so like if someone keeps winning, does he just keep getting good stuff, or does he get so many penalties that that's going to really hurt them at some point? And I just feel that that's still such a hard thing to balance, and I don't know if I've found a game that does it perfectly. Like Aeon's End and Pandemic Legacy, while I have issues with each of them for their own different things, it still feels a little better when you're playing cooperatives, especially like Aeon's End, when we were talking about, oh, I'll take this sticker and if you take that one, depending on that kind of thing. And I don't know how I feel yet about this, if I'm like in love with a competitive version of a Legacy game.
Well, I will say for my money, My City nails it. I thought it had a great built-in catch-up mechanic where essentially the players who don't come in first will be rewarded with various stickers and things that will help them. And if you're winning, of course, you're getting those progress symbols, so you're closer to winning the overall game. But often that will come along with negative effects. And in our run early on, I had a big losing streak, and I was worried about the balancing, but it ended up being a very, very close match between the two of us by the end of it. And this is just one, experience and with two players, and it's hard for me to gauge with more players and different people of different skill levels. Like that may not necessarily happen. There could be a wide range of this kind of thing, but for our experience and from what I played, I thought they did a really great job with that built-in catch-up stuff. And it's definitely, not an easy thing to figure out because you got to do a lot of testing and what feels good, and you don't want to like reward someone for losing, but
it was close, and ideally that's how every game should be, right? Usually.
Ideally, I think.
I also went on a losing streak, and I still didn't feel like I felt what I got there at the end hurt me more than helped me. I don't know if it's a mental mindset or how many games they.
I think it was specifically really one thing, right? That like one type of reward you didn't like.
Yeah, but it still felt.
Sure. I just want to be sure. I just want to be clear.
And that's why, like, in the end, I still don't think I like the Legacy competitive because you can have a bad game in anything. That's I don't think you could ever avoid that in a board game. But if you have a bad game of Magic, you're like, whatever, let's shuffle up and do a new one. If we have a bad game of Risk, because God knows you will with those dice, you just set up again. When you have a Legacy elements, it just stings a bit more.
Yeah.
And that actually still happens to cooperative ones too. God knows Pandemic Legacy, we had games where just like, I don't think we could have won. The deck just was technically sorted in a way that unless maybe we knew exactly. So in the end, this could just be a critique on Legacies in general.
Yeah, well, let's step outside of the Legacy element. In terms of the actual core gameplay as it evolves from game to game, I think if you're not concerned about winning or losing, and I understand how that can feel punishing or rewarding or whatever in different ways, but just the game itself, I think the gameplay is really great. It's very simple, classic kind of a game.
It's not difficult to do a chapter.
Right, no,
it's very nice.
You can breeze through it. It plays quickly. It's very accessible, and I really liked all the new stuff that kept getting added. It was always a different kind of a thing that I thought made my brain work in a different way, and some of the things I was good at, some of the things I was bad at, but it felt like a new kind of a puzzle. And I think because the gameplay is so sort of classic, it's the Tetris kind of thing. You're fitting in shapes in different places. It never really got boring to me. It just kind of worked each time with the different tweaks.
I definitely agree with that. We've complained a lot. We're going to keep picking on it, and I know everyone's going to get angry, but Pandemic Legacy, just not adding enough, we felt, until really a certain, like, the end. We didn't think it was crazy. And this felt like every episode, not even chapter, we were like, oh, now we need to do this differently. And because the games are a little bit shorter too, even though it's competitive, I just felt like it never dragged on or stayed longer than it was welcomed, at
Yeah.
least in terms of timing and stuff. And the other big thing we sort of just slightly mentioned, but it is a big deal, is you can still play it.
Yeah, it is still there. It will still be a game when you are finished. Although I think even if that eternal mode didn't exist, we already got our money's worth out of this game. The copy was sent to us, to be clear, but for the price of the game, it's very reasonable.
We looked that up because we were like, how much is this? And like, that's pretty good for 24 games plus the eternal mode. And, you know, like I said, the rules actually, each time you had to like learn a whole new thing. It took away some things, then maybe added them back in. So you have to try. It's like almost like when you see a lot of these digital puzzle games are like, all right, in this one, you can only place blue pieces or something weird. So it's not really adding something that's completely out of the blue all the time, but maybe forcing you to have to think differently and how to solve it. You're like, okay, now there could be something weird. I'm going to make up a rule. This is not one in there. So maybe I need a piece to touch a rock and a tree. And you have to be like, oh, now I really need to think differently how I build this stuff.
Yeah, it's impressive how much versatility they're able to bring in with really, sometimes you'll get some new pieces, but for the most part, you're just working with the same buildings and tiles for the whole game. And they're able to get a lot of mileage out of that.
Crits and misses for My City.
Crits. The tile laying gameplay is accessible but addictive. Even without the constant influx of new ideas and mechanisms added, it is satisfying and fun to play.
The basic mechanics aren't too complex and should allow anyone to dive into this legacy game.
Once you're finished with the legacy campaign, or if you just want to take a break and play with a different group of players, there is the Eternal mode, which gives you unlimited replayability.
A common complaint of legacy games is that they're done and you can't be played with when they're finished. So this Eternal mode gives players that option to be able to still play My City even when they finish that legacy storyline.
In the long term, we found My City to be fairly well balanced, with effective catch-up mechanics as well as varying strategies, so players who excel in one area may do well in one session, but not as well in another.
Misses. Overall, we didn't have too many issues with the rulebook. Our main complaint comes out with the dealing out of rewards to players, specifically for 2 players. Sometimes it was confusing whether we were supposed to get the second place because there are 2 people, or we're supposed to get the other player reward because it was a little confusing in understanding why one person would or would not get something.
There were just a few instances of this example where we had to look it up and make sure we were doing it correctly, which is something that you can expect from a legacy game which is constantly adding new rewards and new rules each time you play.
We ended the game with a close score, so we're not questioning it in terms of its balancing. However, some of the rewards don't feel that great. I don't know if this is just the nature of a competitive legacy game, but it is something to keep an eye out when you're playing to make sure that you understand that some things might not seem to be as good as others.
Depending on which stretch of the game you're in, you might find some players with a long winning or losing streak, and for a competitive legacy game over time, that can feel a little bit worse than in a typical board game. It seems that our opinions diverge a little bit on this one. I definitely feel like I am warmer towards My City than you are, Will. I think a lot of that stems from just maybe our base, how we feel about competitive legacy games, that type of genre in general. But for me, I really, really enjoyed this. And I have to say, now having played it so many times, I definitely am happy it was nominated for Spiel des Jahres, and I feel like it deserved the win. Honestly, I enjoyed it that much. I really do think it's that special of a game. It's a legacy game that's accessible to new players, like very easy, but still incorporates those ideas into it. I think it makes sense that, this could be like your first legacy game and you would understand how it works. It's not too overwhelming, but still a lot of fun for a veteran player. So, I mean, that being said, how do you feel about it now, having experienced it fully as a Spiel des Jahres game? Do you think it was worthy of that nom?
Yes and no. I don't think it was worthy of the Spiel des Jahres. I think it was worthy of the Kenner Spiel.
You still think it's too complicated?
I would not want to play this with family. I don't think family members would, especially going on a losing streak.
We should specify our family members.
No.
Some people have smart family members who do know how to play games.
I don't even think about like in terms of complexity.
Yeah.
I just think like if I was playing with, let's say someone who's like 10, I think that they could wrap their head around the mechanics of this, and they were put through a long losing streak, even if they were told that that would balance out in the end. I think after 9 games, they're going to be like, I'm done.
Maybe. I mean, I had that experience in this game. I lost like our first 7 in a row. I felt kind of bad, but I got back up on the horse, and it all turned out okay in the end. And even when I was losing, I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't thrilled, but I was still enjoying the game and having fun with it. So I don't know. I do think that in terms of, I still think that for Spiel des Jahres, at least, they only are looking at the complexity and not the saltiness.
Well, no, because I think for the Spiel, isn't it all about how, like it being sold in the German marketplace for families? I thought.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
to me, that's why I'm looking at it. I don't think it's. I just don't think a legacy game, maybe a cooperative one, but is the kind of thing you're gonna bring to a family that aren't hardcore gamers.
Well, I mean, agree to disagree. Yeah, I thought this one bridged that gap.
I think it's a fantastic game. And I think it's still probably better than most legacy games that I've played. I think competitive wise though, I think King's Dilemma is still better. Partially, I think because there's no way if you're winning or not.
Right. That is true. That is something about it. I mean, it sounds like yes, most of our issues stem from just that. I think if you just separate yourself from that and you're not worried about who's winning or losing, I think. Or even if you are a little bit, like you can still be competitive. I think you'll still have a great time with this game. I would easily recommend this to anybody who likes tile laying games or is even vaguely interested in a legacy game of this type.
I think it's definitely a good pick for a legacy game because it is competitive and it has all these issues I'm mentioning, but it's still lighter and more interesting. I think any pain it has caused, so to speak. And I don't think pain is the right word, but it's what I'm using right now, is still better than the feeling of boredom and being dragged along for the sake of finishing something. Like, I feel like that's still a worse feeling, if that makes sense.
No, definitely didn't feel that. I was always happy to continue playing this game. Well, it's called My City. It's going to be available very soon everywhere if it's not already where you are. And, if you're one of the people who's played it, let us know in the comments what you think. Did you like it? Do you like that legacy aspect? What do you think about the Eternal mode, which, pares it down a little bit, doesn't include everything you get later on? And how do you feel about the balance overall, or competitive legacy games in general? Do you think it just doesn't work? I think it works. I liked it. Anyway, let us know in the comments section and continue following us for more reviews like this. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Will.
And this was Roll for Crit.
Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and support us on Patreon. That would make us happy.
Maybe the next video is the one where Jonathan does a silly dance.